So when you're mixing your colors, again, just like the way you brush, then go contrary all the time and slosh the paint around, move it around.
On your pants, that's the way to do it.
One of the techniques that I like to use to begin a portrait is to start by mixing a dark color, almost black, by using a mixture of deep red, Prussian blue, and Meridian green. This gives me a deep, rich color and will act as a base in helping me establish tonal values. At this stage of the game, I'm not really thinking about anything. I'm just simply looking at the model and looking at the system of values that are on her face. There's a directional light source coming in from the left, and I established the value system by dropping in the dark areas. These dark areas act as my base. They are a guidepost for me for later on as I build up the image. Rather than being concerned with proportions at this point, my primary concern is to just sort of establish a feel for the shape of the model. Some of the details, or some of the beginning of the details that I start to place, are the cheekbones and the lips, the shadow on the forehead. Again, always using just a burnt umber up against the dark gray undertone. One of the ways in which I really like to paint is to keep things very, very loose. That goes from my frame of thought and my way of thinking to the actual brush that I'm holding in my hands. The idea would be probably not to get too confined with what is in front of me, but just establish some sort of a rhythm and a flow based on what I know or what I actually feel that I should be putting down on the paper. If I start to look too much at the details at this point, I get caught up in them, and then the painting starts to look tight. It'll start to tighten up. And all I'm really trying to be at this point is almost like an interpreter of what's in front of me. I'm not concerned with getting a likeness. I'm actually more concerned with having fun with this. The overall use of my materials also. I work with brushes that are large and rather unorthodox. I'm working with the tips of very large brushes to get detail, and the very wide angles or wide parts of the brush are there for me to make the mistakes. I actually thrive. My work thrives actually on the mistakes that I make, because I end up using those as part of the depth that gets added on to the portrait. All of ours to try and cover their mistakes or cover their tracks. In this case, I try and go out of my way to create some, using drips and using colors where they would not normally be, over-pronouncing certain areas, and even just adding splashes of color that would be, somewhat frightening, and saying, oh, okay, how am I going to pull myself out of this one? How will this work? How will I make it work? Some of those questions start to arise during the whole process, and that's what makes the portrait come alive for me. It's almost a metaphor for our own lives. I mean, we're constantly getting ourselves into trouble and then pulling ourselves out of it, and I just find that that's where the excitement lives.
supposed to be using.
within our daily life. And part of that psychology is what I try and interpret and I try and bring into my portraiture.
There's the box.
Oh, really? You're having problems with mine? Any questions you have, any challenges, just let me know. We'll decide. We'll figure it out. That's what we do here, right? Make it look easy, make it easy.
Yeah.
And, almost like a glaze there. Build up.
This is thin paint, right?
Using just thin paint right now, I like to kind of give it a bit of a ghost effect.
Toast.
So she's coming forward. She's putting that here. Very cool.
At this point, I'm actually really starting to get into the model. I'm starting to understand her position under the hot light and almost getting into her mind, trying to reason with her, I guess, communicate with her telepathically and trying to feel the weight of her head on her neck, the stiffness, the joints as they're starting to get tight. And I start to use my brush to contour and to hug.
Now, the base you put on that cardboard, you said that was household paint? Is
Yeah,
household
that's just
acrylic?
basic household paint. I have the whole gallon here, you guys can use it. Every bit, I brought the entire gallon. So now I'm softening the edges. You see how I had started off with this much more rigid, structured, and now my job is to loosen up with the brush and kind of go around the face till I get to the point where I'm happy with the overall feeling. And the mood, the serenity that she's evoking right now becomes very important to me. This is what I'm trying to go and get.
That helps. What is it? Is that moving something?
It sounds like a bunch of
It sounds like something upstairs, but I don't, something else outside. It's a marching band. I would say. Well, that's a band. Yeah.